The City of Stone, an insignificant short story, written and illustrated by Panini Artimatics. Sometimes, people do things that they know they'll regret later. Sometimes, it goes far worse than anyone ever thought it could. And sometimes, you get something good out of it. Panny was risking everything on that chance. She ran at top speed through the forest, pushing branches out of the way as she went. This new lead could be the breakthrough she needed to finally prove that there really was a hidden magic city. Her short brown hair whisked behind her, the cold air rushing by her pointed ears. Her eyes, a bright yellow with excitement, shone in the evening dark. Her best friend, a mortal named Stella, ran behind her, hacking through the branches with her sword. She may be muscular, but Panny was fast. Panny looked behind her, grinning at Stella. She gave her a snarky wink and ran head first into a wall of rock. Dazed, she shook her head, fighting off the urge to pass out. Her eyes flashed a cold gray as her head throbbed. Oh, what the— She looked at what she had run into. There was a side of what looked like a cliff in front of her, with a sort of glyph carved into the side. Panny's heart fluttered. The glyph was very similar to the locking spell she had found not 2 days ago. This one looked more complicated, though. Panny, what happened? Are you okay? Stella heaved as she caught up with Panny, slowly catching her breath. She ran her hands through her dark, curly hair, which was somehow still nice and tidy. What is that? That's what I was wondering. It looks like that locking spell from a few days ago, but this one's different. She touched the glyph carefully. As her fingers made contact with it, the glyph lit up in a soft purple hue. Panny jumped back, shoving Stella behind her. What? Her eyes shifted to a purple shade. She looked over to Stella. It was touch it! What's it? The glyph flared up, and the wall of stone in front of the pair crumbled and fell to the ground in a heap of rocks and rubble, revealing a dark tunnel. How? What? Panny stammered. Cares how it happened? It's right here. This secret entrance you were looking for, Stella piped up, pushing past Panny. Her prosthetic legs clicked against the pile of rocks as she made her way inside. Panny followed her friend cautiously, taking great care to keep an eye out for any indications of more spells or enchantments. The tunnel went on for what felt like an eternity until Panny could see a light shining at the end. Stella! She peeked over her friend's shoulder. A light! We're almost through! She pushed past Stella, breaking into a run to reach the light. Excitement had fully overcome all of her anxiety. She broke through the light and was greeted by exactly what she was looking for. A city, overgrown with moss and vines. There were many bioluminescent flowers and mushrooms all around the city, lighting up the area. Annie laughed with excitement. This was what she had been looking for. All her hard work had finally paid off. She ran through the first few homes, investigating the plants, and suddenly came to a stop. She could sense 3 other sources of emotion coming from deep within the city other than herself and Stella. Panny jumped as Stella tapped her shoulder from behind. She looked shaken up. Her eyes were wide, and she had a very tight grip on her sword. But this was no mystery to Panny, since her magic allowed her to sense the emotions of others. Stella, I know you're also scared, but hear me out, Panny said, already sweating. I don't think we're alone here. Stella nodded. I know. Look beside you. Complying, Panny turned her head. There were statues. Hundreds of them. They all were in different stages of decay, with broken limbs and cracks along faces and clothing. But what was the most horrifying about them was that they all looked like generic people from many years ago. Generic people frozen in motion. Many of them had frightened expressions on their faces, and some were in fighting stances, many protected, while others hid. Panny let out a shaky breath. It became apparent to her very quickly. These statues were once real people. As she walked through the empty city, the atmosphere became more and more unsettling. In the center of the city, there was what looked like a town square, and in the center, 2 statues stood facing each other. and both were emitting signals of emotion. Penny stepped towards the closest statue cautiously. If it really was alive, she would have to be prepared to fight if it attacked. The statue was of a heavily armored man holding a long sword out in front of him. He was in a defensive stance, almost as if he was protecting something. Taking a deep breath, Penny placed a hand on the statue's shoulder. It didn't move. She turned back to Stella, smiling at her. "It's okay. I think it's just a false—" A voice rang out in her head. "The seal is finally broken. I can finally rest. Thank you, young stranger." Penny let out a shaky breath. "What? Who are you? What seal?" She looked around frantically. "What seal did I break? What the heck are you talking about?" "Fret not, and seek the foil to the air." Penny whipped her head around, desperately looking for the source of this mysterious voice. Her eyes were an intense purple color, almost illuminating the area around her. "What air? What are you on about? Who are you?" she yelled as she cupped her hands around her mouth. It was no use. The voice did not answer. It was gone, as well as any sign of human emotion coming from it. Penny whipped her head around, looking at all the statues. Her eyes fell upon one statue that stood out from the rest. It was the other one that Penny could sense an emotion from, except unlike the armored man, the signal had not vanished along with the voice. The statue was of a young man. He was clothed in a tunic and long flowing cape, with a crown floating around his head like a halo. His eyes were wide open, but blank and almost sad. Penny couldn't quite discern what emotions were coming from this statue. She reached her hand out and gently brushed the statue's face. As she did that, the stone cracked, revealing a section of pale skin. Penny shrieked and quickly turned around, dashing off deeper into the city. She heard Stella cry out, and the gentle whoosh of her prosthetics changing from walking to running mode, and then all the sound around her cut out. Buildings and statues flew by her as she ran past the horrifying scenery of frozen horror and misery. She ran into a moss-covered building at the very back of the town, tucked as far against the wall as was physically possible. Once inside, Penny let out a shaky breath, leaning against the wall. The first thing she noticed was that the building's light was entirely red, almost like there was a never-ending alarm going off. She took another breath and began to examine her surroundings more thoroughly. The inside of the building was damp and covered in moss and other vegetation. There were drops of water falling down from the ceiling, hydrating the plant life below it. The room was lit up by clusters of glowing red crystals. The crystals resembled the modern potentia gems she had seen more powerful casters use before, except these weren't as polished or clean-cut. She shook her head, steadying her nerves, and continued into the building. The crystals formed a sort of path, leading up to another, much larger crystal. Inside the crystal, Penny could make out the silhouette of a young human being, and like the statues, Penny could sense a signal of emotion coming from it. "Penny, what happened? You just ran—" Stella yelled, stopping suddenly. "What is that?" Her brown eyes were wide, focused on the massive red crystal in front of her. She glanced over at Penny. "You're going to touch it, aren't you?" Penny nodded, stepping forward. She reached her hand out, touching the crystal. It had the same reaction as the glyph from before did. It started glowing brightly and collapsed. When the light cleared, someone fell out of the heap of crystal. As Penny got closer, she could make out the limp form of a young boy, probably only around 12 or 13 years old. His face was partially obscured by a mask, but he didn't seem in any pain, and Penny could only sense a feeling of joy coming off of him. He had blonde hair and was dressed in a simple tunic and chest plate, almost like he was a soldier in training. She looked to Stella. "What should we do? He's alive, I can tell." Stella furrowed her brow. "We should definitely make sure he wakes up, and this is a good opportunity to take a rest. This place is pretty secure and out of the way. Hopefully that person statue from before won't find us here." Penny nodded and knelt down, picking up the young boy and setting him back down on a soft-looking patch of moss. "A break sounds like a really good idea. It's late," she muttered. "Penny, you should rest," Stella piped up. A lot has happened in the past few hours. Just sleep a little. I'll take first watch, she said gently. Her face was soft and genuine. Penny yawned. Okay, you win. Just make sure to wake me up when it's my turn to keep lookout. She stretched and laid down next to the young boy. See you in a few hours, she muttered as she drifted off to sleep. Penny woke up to Stella shaking her in a panic. Penny! Penny! He's waking up! She looked between Penny and the boy frantically. Looking towards the young boy, Penny yawned and rubbed her eyes. It took her a minute to process what was in front of her. But when she did, she leaped towards the boy, her eyes a bright yellow. The boy's eyes opened slowly. They were a vibrant green and very large. He looked up at her and suddenly sat up very quickly, hitting Penny in the face as he did so. Penny's eyes flashed a dull gray, and she held her nose and forehead gingerly. Earth? The boy's emotional signal changed to concern. Oh my goodness, are you okay? I'm so sorry, he apologized rapidly. Penny groaned. It's okay, kid. Just be more careful next time, okay? The gray slowly faded from her eyes, and they turned back to yellow. The young boy squinted at Penny. Your eyes. They keep changing color. Why? Am I hallucinating? The boy muttered quizzically. Penny smiled. My magic makes it so that my eyes change color depending on my emotions. I can also sense the emotions of others, and that's how I found you and knew you were alive, she explained, crouching down to the young boy's eye level. Stella tapped Penny's shoulder. Penny, I think it might be wise to introduce ourselves to him, she advised. She turned to the boy. My name is Stella, and this is my friend Penny. We're the ones who freed you. What's your name? Aqua, he said with a smile. My name is Aqua. It's nice to meet you. Thank you for saving me. I have a class this morning. Penny and Stella exchanged nervous looks. Look, Aqua, kiddo, I think it's been a long time since you've been awake. What year do you think it is? Penny asked nervously. It's 1622, he said cheerily. You didn't know? What year do you think it is? Penny grimaced. Aqua, it's 2022. It's been 400 years since you've been awake. She didn't want to break the news to him, and it was made even worse when she saw his face drop. His jaw dropped, and he looked at her with dismay. No, that's not true. There's no way. Where's Half-Master? Who are you two? Stella gave him a sympathetic look. Hey, I know you're scared. This is huge news, but now is not a good time to panic. There is a possibly hostile person somewhere out there, and we really can't let him find us, Stella explained, putting her hand on his shoulder. Penny looked at her, startled. Stella usually hated to touch people, and yet here she was, comforting this young boy. She gasped as Stella pulled Aqua into a gentle hug. Her eyes turned pink, and she jumped into the hug. Stella's right, she said gently. This will all get explained eventually. We're just as confused as you are, kiddo. When Stella and Penny let go, Aqua nodded, wiping tears from his eyes. You're right. Half-Master always said that things will get better as we learn. We should go and try to figure out what's going on. Penny and Stella stood up, pulling Aqua with them. That's a good idea, kid. We need to make sure to stay hidden, though, unless you don't think we need to, Stella said, looking between Penny and Aqua. Aqua thought for a minute. If the person you saw was like me and was a citizen of Crusadus, then we should be fine. To my knowledge, no one here is dangerous, he said, running a hand through his hair. Penny smiled. Then it's settled. We can explore this place and look for some answers, she exclaimed, pointing to the sky as her eyes turned yellow again. She made eye contact with Stella and relaxed a little. We should, still be careful, though. Caution is always a good thing. The group traveled in silence for what seemed like ages before Penny finally spoke up, breaking the quiet. Wow, this place is wonderful, Penny said with wonder. It's hard to believe you all could thrive without the luxuries we have these days. Yeah, this place really is quite amazing. Aqua stopped in his tracks. His gaze was focused on a silhouette in the distance. Penny had just opened her mouth to ask him what was wrong when his face suddenly lit up. Hey! Over here! It's me, Aqua! He waved at the silhouette excitedly, and the silhouette got closer. And closer. Soon, the young man from the cracked statue was standing face to face with the small group. He had pale skin and dirty blonde hair. There was a large crack across his face, which looked like it was only newly scabbing over. He wore a light purple tunic with a long, flowing cape. His hands were gloved, and there were dark circles under his eyes. Aqua grinned at him. "Today, do you have any idea what's happening? Because I sure don't," he rambled, waving his hands around and bouncing. Panny realized then that Aqua was hiding just how scared he was behind that smile and friendly conversation. His emotional signal was that of nervousness and fear. But he kept on smiling. Panny would have to talk to him about that later. The young man was scowling, his eyes darting around the area. "What are you doing here? How are you not stoned like everyone else?" He rubbed his palms as sweat dripped down his face. "Don't play victim, you monster! You know you did this! You're the center of whatever this is, and the only statue that wasn't fighting back," Stella snarled, jabbing her finger in his direction. He gave a shocked look. A genuine one at that. "No, it's not my fault. This isn't what the spell was supposed to do." The young man shook his head and fell to his knees. "It should have worked! All it was supposed to do was freeze time until I was old enough to lead. I don't understand." His voice cracked and tears fell down his cheeks. "What did you try to do?" Panny screamed. "Don't you see what has happened to this place? This was your doing." The young man choked. I thought it would work. Why?" His head snapped over to glare at Panny. "You! This is all your fault! You tampered with my spell, didn't you?" His black eyes were sharp, his eyebrows furrowed intensely. Panny clutched her head. She had never felt an anger this strong before, but the anger was mixed with something more complex, almost like pain or fear. Stella stepped in front of her. "Hey! She did nothing wrong! You have no right to accuse her of anything!" The young man scowled. "Of course I have the right to accuse this traitor! I'm the king of Crusadus, and you are my subjects." "The king of Crusadus? The ancient city I've been looking for?" Penny gasped, taking several steps forward. "You were the king?" The young king gave her a look that was somewhere between confused and angry. "What do you mean, were? I am the king of Crusadus. I have been for 5 years. Where have you been?" He squinted his eyes. "Wait a minute. I've never seen you two before. Who are you, and where did you come from?" He took up an offensive stance, and the whites of his eyes began to shift to black. "Your Majesty, please! You weren't thinking clearly," Aqua yelled at the older blonde. "Please calm down. You're going to hurt yourself." "Shut up, Aqua!" the young man snapped. "I know I did everything right. I studied the spell for months. There's no way it was wrong. It's impossible." He held his head between his hands, shaking. Aqua took a step forward, reaching out his hand. Panny gasped, putting out an arm to block the young boy from continuing forward. "Aqua, wait! He's clearly unstable. He might hurt you," she scolded gently. The young boy was frightened, but which she didn't need her magic to tell. His eyebrows were creased, his bright green eyes darting around the cavern, lingering on the crazed ruler in front of them. He, Aqua stammered. He shook his head, looking toward the older boy. "Your Majesty! King Mavelus! Please listen! I promise we can explain this and make it all make sense. You just have to tell us what you know." Aqua stretched his hand out to Mavelus, looking at him pleadingly with his big green eyes. Mavelus's face softened as he reached out his hand. The young king's fingertips brushed against Aqua's outstretched hand. Panny couldn't believe what she was seeing. The crazed young man she had seen just minutes before was now acting so gentle. She was almost starting to feel bad for him when he suddenly lunged forward, yanking Aqua behind him. Aqua hit the ground hard, grunting in pain. His eyes filled with tears as he looked off at Mavelus, who was rushing towards Panny and Stella. "Hey, what are you?" Panny yelled, her eyes turning to a vivid red. Mavelus ran past them, ignoring any attempts to keep him back. His cape billowed behind him, and he left a trail of small cracks in the ground in his wake. A large crevice suddenly opened up in between them as Mavelus vanished, ensuring that they would have to win this battle another day.